never to be really recognized of what we're doing, I guess that sort of spurred us on to really leave something behind that is worthwhile.
Paintings, we actually forget to look at their frames. If we actually do look at the frames, we open up the opportunity to discover other works of art, and if we investigate even further, we can often reveal fascinating stories both about the frames, how they were made, and about the individuals who made them. In a functional sense, frames hold the paintings, we might say, but they also hold stories. Stories about the people who made them and about lives and social histories far beyond the walls of the gallery. Over time, many paintings have had their frames changed, sometimes more than once, meaning that a single painting can be associated with several different frames across its history. For centuries, framing workshops were overwhelmingly male domains. Women have always worked in them, but they were excluded from the professional guilds that controlled the trade. Their roles were confined and unprotected, and their interests were unpromoted. So historically, gilding was considered a delicate task suitable for women's hands, whereas carpentry and design were cast as men's work. Many women entered framing workshops and businesses through family connections, such as a husband's workshop or a father's trade. This was always within the boundaries set by a male-controlled system of apprenticeships, lower pay, and limited recognition. In the 19th and early 20th century, these patterns were echoed inside the National Gallery itself. At this time, the only women officially employed here were housemaids. I guess cultural expectations reinforced the limits. In many professions, marriage meant the end of a woman's employment, a rule formalized as the marriage bar, which restricted or barred married women from certain jobs. At some stage in the early 20th century, the National Gallery fell in line with the civil service's application of this policy, though it was later abolished in 1946. Before then, the gallery had connected with frame makers and frame businesses through contracts to outside firms only. Women could only contribute to the gallery's framing work indirectly, most often through gilding or other specialised roles in external workshops. A few surviving records in our archive offer glimpses of this involvement, and they trace the names and work of women who, though outside the gallery staff lists, nonetheless shaped its collection.
Sometimes in the history of framing, we find that a woman would take over the running of an established framing business at the death of her husband. This was what happened in the case of Elizabeth Mary Ford. She took over the framing business in Wardour Street in Soho in 1842 after the death of her husband George. Upon her death in 1856, she unusually left the business to 2 of her 10 children, in fact, her eldest and youngest daughter. So here we have the family tree of Elizabeth Mary Ford and her 10 children, and the family firm was taken over by her eldest daughter, Eliza Mary, and the youngest one, Catherine. And they then traded as Eliza and C. Ford. The company supplied frames for a number of years to the National Gallery. So on the 1st of July 1857, we have a description of payments. Interestingly here, we see a group of housemaids, including Martha Hurst, our first known employee. Going down here, we see Eliza and C. Ford's payment for 100 polished holly frames for the Turner sketches, 15 shillings and sixpence each. The second woman that we find mentioned in our archive is Mary Batten. She was a skilled painter and gilder. She was married to John Dixon Batten, one of the founding members of the Society of Painters in Tempera. Apart from working on gilded frames for members of the Arts and Crafts Guild, Mary also worked for the National Gallery. We find just one painting that she was involved with making a frame for in 1908, when she was paid £47, 7 shillings and 8 pence for a carved frame of Benozzo Gottslie's picture that we now call The Abduction of Helen. A couple of decades after Mary Batten, we come across an extremely interesting story of Frau Annie Pollock, who had been working as a framer in Germany. And with her husband Fritz, they tried to set themselves up in England. There's a very interesting letter that the director of the time wrote on the 29th of November 1935, praising her for her work. He writes, "Madam, I was so grateful to you for showing me your reproductions of antique frames. They are as good as any I have seen, and certainly better than any being made in England at the present time. I believe that you will find many people in this country who will be glad of them, and I think that from time to time there would be pictures in the National Gallery which you could frame more successfully than anyone else. I hope that you succeed in establishing your business in England." After that letter, we find one in quick succession from the director of the National Gallery writing to the Home Secretary to advocate for their case of remaining and working in London. They specialise in reproductions of antique frames and achieved a great reputation in Berlin. At the present time, it is almost impossible in England to find anyone capable of making a satisfactory reproduction of an antique frame. It would be a great advantage not only to this gallery, but to numerous private collectors and to the art trade if Herr Pollock and his wife were allowed to carry on their business in this country. So this is what they hoped would happen. But very sadly, Annie Pollock died the following year as a result of an operation, and her husband wrote again to the director, Kenneth Clark, to explain Mrs. Pollock's passing and also asking him whether he would write a recommendation to the Home Office so that he could work in the country. And the relationship then continues, and we have many letters in the National Gallery. For example, we have one letter here dated the 7th of November 1944, where they are discussing the frames for our 4 little Giovanni di Paolos. And then we have a much later letter dated the 7th of October 1963, where they are discussing the frame for the Cranach. So as a result of Annie Pollock's ambition to write to the director of the National Gallery, her husband was able to set up a business and have a working relationship with the National Gallery for well over a quarter of a century.
By the late 20th century, the National Gallery began to look very different, not just in what was on its walls, but in who worked behind the scenes. This was the era when the first women were formally employed in the gallery's frame conservation roles. But across the gallery, more women were taking up positions in departments where they had never been seen before. In the photographic department, for instance, we had Bunny Wilson, Lucy Close, and Betty Churchyard. Together, they all transformed and headed up the department for many years. Over in the curatorial department, we had Lillian Browse during the Second World War, a role that paved the way for others, and this included Dillian Gordon and Susan Foister. Over in the Registrar's office, we had Margaret Stewart, who set up the first UK Registrar's group. And then in the education department, we had Erica Langmuir, a pioneering force behind the gallery's learning programme. Of course, these are just a few names, and by no means do they offer a complete list. But what they demonstrate is that as more departments were created and developed, the more women joined the gallery's staff, and therefore contributing across a widening range of specialisms.
My name is Isabella Cozzo. I'm the 5th woman here at the National Gallery employed as a frame conservator. Like my colleagues, I worked in various workshops and then got employment here at the National Gallery, where we do restore picture frames, make replicas and look after the collection so the paintings are in good hands, in safe hands. John England employed all these women partly because we were educated in conservation, and he wanted that department to be not just framers, he wanted us to be conservators, meaning that we are documenting everything and look at the history and trying to look at the frame from all angles, front, back, side, so to understand, are these genuine articles, are these older frames, are these modern frames. One of my previous colleagues, Beth Hatt, she was very much interested in the arts and crafts, and especially how to use the old techniques. Well, look at this document. It doesn't look like very much, but it's given to us by Beth Hatt's son.
Beth Hatt studied gilding, picture frame restoration, frame making and decorative finishes with Mr. D. Mackay Edward. And over here she says he was a gilder, carver and picture framer with 50 years experience. And then her next main qualification was for another number of years, where she studied gilding and carving at the City and Guilds School of Art, where she got her diploma. This is quite fun, isn't it? Because it's from the HR department. She's been told that she doesn't have to jump through very many hoops at all to get employed. Look, it says, Mr. England, the head of our framing department, has informed me that you mentioned that you'd be interested in becoming permanently employed at the National Gallery after your course at the City and Guilds of London School of Art finishes next summer. And I'm therefore writing to confirm that we shall be happy to consider you for a permanent post. So here we've got Beth Hatt's manuscript for a book about the frame maker's trade, in a way, that in fact only remains in this file because it was never actually published. But all her life's work and knowledge has been fed lovingly into the pages of this manuscript. This book is written for and dedicated to those painters and craftsmen that aspire to make beautiful works of art using the physical techniques and the spiritual values of the medieval artist-craftsman. In essence, this book is written to enable modern-day painters to be able to be fully conversant with traditional, time-tested techniques, and from this complete practical understanding and knowledge, be free to create what is in the mind's eye. Isn't that great?
Wonderful. Oh, that's just really what I'm all about. It's just fabulous. Oh, look, this is a gilder's knife. I still use it. It's exactly the same. And the gilder's tip, what does she describes it as?
Used to transfer leaf from the cushion to the object to be gilded.
So you pick up your gold with this one, and the gilder's mop I use a lot to press down the bubbles. Beautiful. when we restore a frame, you won't see it. You know, the main point is that you don't see what we've done, so your work is never going to be seen, which is okay. That means that you've done your job really well, but also we've really tried to put a different spin on it and create our own little interest and world on it, to do the research on picture frames and look at the various layers and carvers and gilders and look at their workshops. It just keeps everything alive, and it brings the frames closer to us. My job then is now to put all their knowledge together, and I created dossiers so for the next generation they can build up and continue the work that my predecessors have done. We keep documenting each frame that we have, new frames, as much as the ones that we have in store, because they're an important part of their history. You feel a bit like a detective. Each little information will give you a clue what you're dealing with, and I find that quite exciting. We have seen frames that even the best expert have said that's a reproduction, and then I sort of start digging and I find that's an original old frame, and that's really exciting. In my own work, you know, I sort of learned that it's worth doing what I do and not just thinking that I'm not good enough. I think you learn to be proud of the end product. Some frames are just so beautifully made. I'm in absolute awe of them. And others are quirky, maybe a little bit weird, and even those I find really nice.